Hey, so I'm back. You will have seen this video through a few days later, but I want to know how the morning pages are going. The last time we talked about the outside world establishing what you should or should not be doing or thinking about, and how that leaves you so far outside the circle of what makes you happy. And if you're so busy listening to the outside world, you can't actually make any time to figure out what makes you happy, right? We talked a little bit about the Oscars and how something amazing happened that we all missed because we were so involved in the shoulds. Well, he should get an Oscar nomination. He should do that. But the reality of what was happening is that an independent artist actually made money off of their film for the first time. And that's going to change everything, right? It means that artists don't need to go to Hollywood anymore to get their films made. We don't need an Oscar to make a living. And as a matter of fact, how many Oscar winners of color are no longer working? How many Oscar winners are working regularly, working sporadically, working every now and then? Oscar, Golden Globe, Emmy winners? It's no guarantee. But you know it is a guarantee? Finding out what it is inside of you that you love to do and doing it. That is its own guarantee. And that will eventually make you money. Promise. Swear to God. Now, let's talk about these morning pages. I told you to do them every day and then make note of what kept coming up. What was making you unhappy? What was making you happy? Or if there's no happy or sad about it, what themes, words, ideas, people, subjects kept coming up in those morning pages? Because those are the key to figuring out what it is that you're here to do and how you're going to find it and get to it. And how you're going to move all the crap out of the way. The day job you hate, the boyfriend you can't stand, the boss you can't stand, the crappy apartment with no heat. Like, whatever you're writing about, let's start a grocery list, and let's start to prioritize that list into things that we actually have control over, right? So, you found recurring themes. I'm going to ask you another question. Then I'm going to answer with a question. Who would you be without your problems? Now, I love this question because when people tell me, well, I have problems, so the point is moot, I go, wow, your refusal to even entertain that tells me you have some shit that you don't want to deal with and you must be really miserable. You're more interested in holding on to the story you have about yourself than you are about changing it. That's what the refusal to answer that question is about. You don't actually have to have the answer. But you have to have a willingness to even consider an answer, right? If you're gay, who would you be without homophobia? If you're black, who would you be without racism? If you're a woman, who would you be without sexism? But all those things exist, that's right. But not 99% of the time they don't. You're not being discriminated against 99% of the time in your life. You're being discriminated against 1%, 3%, 5%. What the hell are you doing with the other 95%? Assuming that it's all the other stuff? That's a story. And the morning pages are a good place to figure out what's your story, right? So the first thing is ask yourself, who would you be without your problems? Can't answer it, huh? That's interesting. Then you're going to start to write about that in your morning pages. Who would you be? Pick a life. Pick one from TV. Just pick one. Play that out in your pages. Who would you be without your problems, right? And I can tell you most of your problems are already in your morning pages. It's whatever you're bitching and moaning and complaining about that you feel you have no control over. Because that's what complaint is. Complaining is about gnawing at things that you feel powerless to change. That's what complaint is about, right? Complaints only become an issue when you decide to take action, right? And you decide to take action because you actually see that you have power. So let's look at those things that you're complaining about, right? And start to imagine what your life would be without them. Because once you can imagine what your life would be without them, you can actually start to change your life. But until you can imagine that, you actually can't. And you can never change anyone else. I can't change the Oscars, but I can certainly reframe what it is I want from my life. Do I want an Oscar? I used to. That was my big fantasy. It was. And then I went back and I looked at all the Oscars. and I looked at who was winning, and I looked at the roles, and I realized most of the stuff that I really like is like some old white guys from London are playing those parts. I think, so-and-so had a great career, she has a great career, she has a great career. I remember talking to agents, they're like, who are you liking? I was like, nobody. And out of nowhere, in the morning pages, I realized that I was losing interest in that like goal that I had when I was in acting school, an Oscar. I want to play great roles, and I am not seeing any being written. So I have to write them myself. That changes my set of goals altogether, doesn't it? My goals move from being in somebody else's hands into being in mine. Had I not started writing in those morning pages, I would never have known that. I would never, ever have known that. Right? Once I realized in the morning pages that was the theme that kept coming up, tell a story, tell a story, tell a story. Once I realized that that is what I wanted to do, that there were certain kinds of stories that were super, 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 super important to me, I started examining emotional chords, themes that kept coming up in my morning pages, but also I went through my Netflix K. What movies did I care about? What movies moved me? What characters moved me? Who did I identify with? Let's get at how things make you feel. Because in learning what it is that moves you, which moves you towards happiness, which moves you towards action, which moves you towards joy, once you start writing those things down and getting more specific about them, you can then figure out ways to get more of that in your life, right? But you actually have to entertain this thing you don't have yet, right? There's no way to get it by complaining that it ain't never gonna happen, right? There's just no way. There's no way. That's that glass half empty, right? I can sit around and be like, shoot, the po-po keep killing people all the time. Just killing black people. I feel so sad. Or I can say, I'm going to write a play, a documentary play about people who've, unjustly received police brutality and get, some law enforcement people in the room to listen to the play and let them see it from somebody else's side. I can do that. I can do that. Or I can complain all day long, right? But I can get at something that I care about doing the thing that I'm good at doing, telling a story, right? I wouldn't have known about that if I hadn't explored the places I'm scared to explore in my morning pages, right? I wouldn't have known about that if I hadn't gotten at the places where I have a story about myself that is no longer serving me. And the morning pages and a good therapist will help you find those places where you're holding on to a story about yourself, right? What is it when you were a little girl that you wanted to be, or a little boy when you wanted to be, and why aren't you that right now? What do you dream about? The key is in those morning pages. It's also in the films and movies and books that you read and watch too, by the way. That's another place. I start to make lists then. This is what comes out of the morning pages. 100 things that I love. 100 things that I'm proud of, right? For me, watching my favorite films or television shows always trigger that. I'm like, yeah, that's what I want. So I start making lists, and I keep the list with me all the time. I keep the list in a little journal. When I go to the movies, I'm jotting things down. When I'm in a bookstore, I'm jotting things down. What are my 100 things? 100 things I'm proud of, 100 things I'm afraid of. Oh yeah. And you need to be brutal with yourself about that. Brutal. Because you can't shake it out and examine it and change it until you can really look at it. Why does it matter to me so much what this person or that person thinks I should be doing? The day I realized that what my father wanted me to be a lawyer was about him and not me, and I no longer cared, was a beautiful day in the neighborhood, let me tell you. Me and Mr. Rogers did a dance. Because that wasn't about me. It was about him. The 4 agreements finally sunk in. Don't take anything personally. Just don't take anything personally. That's not my joy. That's not what I want it to be. Right? And the minute I let go of that story, I was supposed to be the lawyer for my father. I realized, oh my God, I never wanted to be a lawyer. That's his story. That's not my story. That's not the story I wanted to do. It's just not. Right? What are those stories? Write them down. Write down the themes, right? If you're watching a movie and it's a mother and a daughter going at it and they just can't find a way to love each other, and that sends you into a paroxysm, how do you say that word? I can't say it. Into a fit of crying and tearing and weeping, right? That's something you care about. Take that out and shake it out. Look at it. What is it about that story that moves you? What part of your life feels like that, right? How can you shake that out and get rid of it? How can you separate out that painful event? Really look at it and go, wow, that wasn't about me, that was about her. I can let that go now. And then you'll realize all the things you've been doing in your life that were about that conflict can go away. For me, it was my dad wanted me to be a lawyer. And once I finally shook that out, I could move all that space. I could move all those law school applications and throw them in the trash. I had to spend all that time reading about law schools, right? Looking for apartments in a particular city where a law school was. Once I could let go that that was somebody else's story, it freed me up to figure out I was an artist and a storyteller. But it took me about 7 years to do that. I had 17,000 jobs for then. I was going to be an attorney on Capitol Hill, right? So I told Mrs. Edelman, and she's like, you're an artist, though. And I was like, I don't have permission to be an artist. That's for little rich girls, not a little black girl from the projects. It took me 7 years to figure out that was somebody else's story about what a little black girl from the projects could do. I didn't want to be a lawyer. Right? I had those logic questions on the LSAT, sweet baby Jesus. If nothing else proved to me that's not where I was meant to be, then those logic questions were it. Right? Story. 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 What's your story? Not the one that's been handed to you from somebody else. What is your story? And who would you be without that story? Spend some time writing. I'm listening. Ask me questions. You can comment in the blog. You can comment in the comment section here on Facebook. You can comment on Twitter. This video will be posted all those places. It will be on thedreamunlocked.com. And you can go down to the comments and start sharing. What is your story? What is the story of who you were supposed to be? And how much of that is really what you want as opposed to someone else? And here's the ticket. As you start writing these things down on those morning pages, you will know when it's your story and when it's somebody else's. You know how? Because remember that list I had you do? 100 things you love, 100 things you're afraid of, 100 things you're proud of, 100 things that make you smile, 100 things that make you laugh. Just find 100 things that elicit a common emotion. That's the list, right? When you were going through trying to find out, oh, this is a story of me. When you're writing that story, who was I supposed to be when I was 6 years old? Who was I supposed to be when I was 18 and I graduated from college? Who was I supposed to be when I got my MFA or when I got my law degree? Who was I supposed to be? Am I that person? As you write that down, the story of who you're supposed to be, if none of the emotions from your list, your 100 things I love, 100 things that make me happy, if at least 50 of those things don't show up in that story, that means that story is not yours. That's a story that's been imposed upon you. When I ask you who would you be without your problems, it means that you've accepted a story of yourself that came from the outside world, not you. That's why you can't answer that question. You are now being defined by the world's problems. I'm sorry, you might not like a little black girl with a big butt. You might like skinny girls with blonde hair. But that's your story. That ain't got shit to do with me. I'm still cute. I'm still happy. Somebody else will want me. Like, sounds really basic, but for a long time I thought I was not good enough and I needed to be that blonde girl to get at what I needed, right? What I then flipped the switch, and this was as a little girl, was I stopped paying attention to what other people were saying. You got bad hair and you too short and you need to stop eating. And I started paying attention to how I felt when I did things I loved. It was like instinctive as a child, right? Don't laugh at me. Diagramming sentences. Oh my God. English. Just diagramming. Dangling participles work with me. Made me happy. I felt smart. I loved books. I loved literature. I loved grand stories. I loved language. I loved vocabulary. I loved spelling bees. When I started focusing on what I felt about the things that I was doing instead of what people were telling me I should feel, an entire paradigm shift. Write those lists, continue the morning pages, and start writing the story of who you're supposed to be. And figure out how much of that story is somebody else's and how much is yours. That's all I got, people.